Welcome to the Wild Courage podcast. Today I am in Sheridan, Wyoming at the Houlihan Ranch and have the great pleasure to sit down for a little bit and talk with Buck Brannaman. Buck, thanks so much for taking the time out of your winter schedule to sit down and talk to us for a little bit.
My pleasure.
So I was thinking on my drive over here, we met in, I want to say 95 maybe, down in Arizona at Bob King. You were putting on a
Yeah.
ranch roping clinic down there, and
Yeah.
that's when I first met you, and that's where the impact that you've had on me and so many started. And I was also thinking about kind of like in the horse side of things of how you talk about having direct pressure and indirect pressure, meaning that direct pressure is when you have a hold of the horse, whether by the lead rope or by the snaffle or there's contact. And then indirect pressure would be where he's loose in the round pen and you're moving him around with no pressure. And something came to me in that, and I haven't spent a lot of time with you. You've had a lot of indirect influence on me through your books and your videos. And I just wonder how sometimes it's for you, of how many people know you and you don't really know them. It's probably been an odd thing to figure out over the years.
Well, I've worked hard at this, as you know, my whole life, and I've had a passion for working with these horses my whole life. And honestly, I don't ever think about maybe how many people know me or are aware of me. I mean, I don't sit there and go, gosh, you really 40 years of being a professional in this business, you're everybody knows you, you're famous or something like that. Yeah. I don't think of things like that. You'd be a better judge than I would. That's why I was telling you the other day when I do this Buck channel that I'm going to launch. There might be 100 people sign up for it, for all I know, or maybe there'll be 100,000. I don't know, because I've never really taken any time to just stop, look back, and see where I've been, because I'm still trying to see where I'm going.
Move forward.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was just interesting because, again, all my mentors that have really helped me develop as a horseman or a roper, I actually got to spend time with,
Yeah.
And it's been cool because I've had all those guys on the podcast and
Good.
got to tell them how important they were in my journey with the horse and stockmanship and roping and in a little bit of the show world that I got to be in. And so to have you as someone that has influenced me equally or as more than any of those guys in an indirect way of influence. I saved up and bought your first roping video set, and then I wore them out, and then I convinced my buddies to buy them, and then I borrowed them because they watched them once and I wore them out.
Yeah.
And so it's an honor. All that to say, it's such an honor to get to sit down with you and for you to take the time to do this. And I just really appreciate all you've done for me and my horses and roping, which has become a passion of mine over the last 25 years since we met. And I grew up on ranches, right? I branded a lot of calves before I ever met you, and then I see you, and I've never seen, outside of a Houlihan, right, guys roping horses out on the ropes. I never seen any of this, and it just came at a time where I just ended my rodeo career. So I was looking to put this passion that I had, and also my identity. I was like kind of a rodeo guy, and now I'm like, now what am I going to do? And then I go to this roping clinic, and I'm like, well, I'll give myself to this. And then it's been, a 25-year journey of trying to figure all this stuff out.
Well, I've sure made a lot of friends through this over the years. And likewise, we talked about the Faraway Horses, my book, and that was interesting because when I told my story in that book, I wanted it to be a story that didn't just appeal to horse people and cowboys, because I already had a platform with them. There was no reason to write a book. I was already around all those people. I thought more of it being something to give hope to someone who was really struggling in their life, that they didn't necessarily have to have a horse or a dog or a goat or anything, but I knew that from the human perspective they could relate to it nevertheless. Even though I used a lot of analogies about horses and things, it still relates to life in general. And that was kind of the premise for writing the book.
Well,
And yet it gave, someone like me doing this for a living, I seem, probably because I'm the guy on the microphone, far away, unapproachable, even maybe intimidating for some people, even at the clinics. It gave them a chance through reading that book to know me in a way that they never would have had the chance.
sure, it's a different platform for
To know
someone
my
to get
heart,
to know you.
you know?
Yeah. Well, that book, as we were talking, I've had the pleasure to be hanging out with you for the last 3 days and share with you a little bit of my story. But you were the first person after reading that book in my life that I ever heard talk about things of your past and childhood that later became very significant for me in my own story. Of you basically gave me permission to talk about things that had plagued and hurt me my whole life from my childhood. And so to your point of like, yeah, I read the horse stuff and I love it because I love the horse stuff, but the impact of why you wrote that book on me, and I know so many others, planted seeds of hope that I think the rippling effects. I read the book again last week ahead of coming here, and it moved me again. I mean, it's just such a powerful tool that you used in being courageous and telling your story, which that's what Wild Courage is all about, is having the courage to maybe tell your story, because the freedom that you fought for in getting healing in certain areas of your life and the people that God put in your life, like your foster parents we'll get into in a minute, but like maybe it gives hope to somebody that's in this spot, and that takes courage to tell your story, especially in our cowboy culture, right? Because
Yeah.
it's such an under the rug swept. You don't talk about your emotions. You don't talk about
Yeah, you're supposed to remain stoic no matter what.
and tough, right?
Yeah.
And you, so that's kind of again the goal of what we're trying to do with Wild Courage is like maybe give that 20-year-old guy permission to be like,
Yeah.
some jacked up stuff happened to me, and if I don't talk to somebody about it,
Yeah.
there's a fork in the road. And for me, it was alcohol,
Yeah.
and it about killed me.
Yeah.
So jumping back into your story a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, of just kind of growing up. You were born and raised early on in Idaho, right?
Yeah, Coeur d'Alene.
In northern Idaho?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I was born in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, of all places. So a lot of times I'll joke around with my friends. I'll say, I don't know if you know it, but Sheboygan, Wisconsin, that's where all the good hands come from. Now, my mother's family was from there. I was a couple of months old and we moved away. We went to California, Thousand Oaks, California.
Oh, yeah.
And ironically, of course, about my dad and what a monster he was. My dad his first job in California is he worked for the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Really? It's ironic, right?
Yeah, kind of the fox guarding the hen
Yeah.
house, and then we didn't live there too long because as a kid, I had terrible asthma, and I guess that happens with a lot of people's kids, and then they kind of grow out of it. But per the doctor's recommendation, we ended up in Idaho.
It's drier air, climate.
Yeah, I
helped.
guess it kind of worked for me and
Did
survived.
One thing I was thinking about when I read the book, did you ever know your grandpa, your dad's dad?
Yeah, I did, and ironically, he and his wife were the kindest, most loving, most normal, beloved people in their community in Indiana, Petersburg, Indiana. All the kids in town, when they retired from their farm, they moved to town in a little house. All the kids in town hung out at their house all the time. They were just beloved. So there wasn't this
Wow.
this circle or legacy of abuse and the kind of things that my dad pulled. It wasn't that.
That's
It
fascinating to me.
started with my dad.
I would have bet money
I
that,
know.
because that's the cycle, right? Whatever's modeled to you, typically you fall into that trap of,
Yeah.
well, this is how my dad did it.
They were the most wonderful, normal, loving
Wow.
people you ever met. They were, a lot like Betsy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking back, can you see where things shifted for him? Maybe
He was a real mysterious person. He was in World War II, and I think he was a prisoner for a while, as close as I can tell.
because those guys.
The
didn't talk
problem
about that.
is with my dad is he was a pathological liar, and he was so good at it. He was brilliant, a very bright guy. So most pathological liars get caught because they kind of forget what they said.
Yeah, it's hard to
and
keep
then
up.
things don't link together. And then someone who's kind of bright will pretty soon go, "Oh, wait a minute."
That's not what you said last time.
He remembered everything he said, and I mean his whole life was a lie. He had some of his stories were just amazing, but they weren't true. So based on that, I just don't know a lot about him. He was a lot of things. He was a saddle maker. He had a boot and shoe repair. He worked in law enforcement from time to time all of his life.
Not lazy.
No, he was a master electrician. He was a union cable splicer,
Wow.
like when they put up the, big high tension lines. He was a union cable splicer, worked in Alaska and worked on the Libby Dam and all kinds of different things. Just could do anything. And he got electrocuted when he was working in Alaska, 17,500 volts.
Wow.
And the two other guys on the tower, the steel tower, they died. And he fell 90 feet to the ground. And I remember that as a little kid because I didn't see him for about 6 months.
Wow.
And apparently he was in the hospital. And, well, I'm sure that probably had some to do.
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of survivor guilt and things that
Well, and he
that start
had,
adding on top of
He had horrible,
war and-
horrible headaches
from
from being electrocuted. And oddly enough, my dad was very mean to animals, dogs, cats, horses, cattle. Dark person.
something inside of him was broken.
Yeah.
That just manifested.
And I would see him day after day. He'd sit at the kitchen table and just tears would run down his face from these headaches. He'd go through like a bottle of Bufferin every couple of days. That can't be real good for you. Well, one day we were out there working with some horses, and he was never any kind of a hand because he was such a violent person, but he got mad at this horse, and he hit this horse in the head with a shoeing hammer, and the horse struck him in the head. And I thought, I was a little guy, and I thought he was dead, and I thought, I'm free, Stopped his headaches.
Nuh-uh.
He never had one again.
I've never heard of such a
What the
thing.
hell's the odds of that?
Wow.
But
But it didn't change his
it
attitude
didn't
towards
change
you.
him,
And
no. He had-
you had an older brother, right, Smokey, who's
Yeah.
4 years older?
about 2 years.
2 years older.
Yeah.
And growing up, were you guys each other's refuge when your dad would go on these fits of rage? And did you guys kind of
Yeah.
cling to each other in that time?
Yeah, we did. I mean, because it was.
Survival, probably.
I mean, I think about it having kids now and kind of how I've made a life for them. My brother and I, every day when we'd walk home from school, when we lived in the Madison Valley there in Ennis, it's about a mile and a half walk. Every day we'd get off the bus, and our main conversation was, "Do you think he's going to kill us tonight?" And then we would ponder, well, if he kills one, just maybe accidentally beats him too much and kills one of us, well, then will he feel obligated to kill the other one?
What kid should be having those
and,
conversations?
Gosh,
right?
I was in the 7th grade, however old you are, 11, 12 years old. That's a hell of a thing for a kid to I would have been 11 because I was way ahead in school. I graduated when I was just barely turned 17. But that's a hell of a thing for a kid to have to process emotionally every day, where you're just terrified to go home. And but we got to where we handled it. You know, when you're in that, that was just life. And we figured probably everybody else lived the same way, that, you know, it was just.
That's what I found in my when talking about some of the stuff in my childhood. They're like, "How did you cope?" I'm like, "I thought it was happening to everybody.
Yeah.
I thought it was part of the deal."
Sure.
And I also thought the belly aches were part of the deal of getting off the school bus,
Yeah.
going into an abusive situation. Was like, okay, fun time's over. Here comes the belly ache.
If you
right?
don't know anything else, you know, we were sheltered. We lived with our dad, and we too figured everybody just kind of lived like that.
And to make the trauma worse, your safe haven, your mom.
Yeah, she died when I was 11.
That around that same time.
Yeah, we were living in Whitehall at the time, and my mother was diabetic, and praise God, I've never had any trouble with that, you know. But she was, you know, in those days they didn't know much about diabetes, and you know, nowadays they're pretty good at controlling it.
You get on top of it early, yeah.
You can have a pretty long life with diabetes, and in those days she was taking insulin shots, and so anyway, my mother had a flu, and so she wasn't eating. She was in bed, and she was pretty sick, so she didn't need to take insulin because she, you know, had no raise in blood sugar. So she was in bed for a couple of days, and I still remember my dad, I guess he was trying to take care of her. He gave her a little bowl of soup, and but he should have known, you know, okay, Carol, you know, do you need some insulin now? And long story short, during the night, she had had a diabetic reaction, and it goes in stages. First is delirium, and then unconsciousness. Well, the next morning, she's unconscious. My dad wakes us up pretty early, and he's so damn cheap, he didn't even call an ambulance. He loads her into the truck. It took all three of us. My mom was 6 foot tall, big lady. And the last thing I remember of my mother, ever touching my mother, was I was kind of holding her legs up to get her in the truck. And I remember urine running over my hands. And that was it. So then me and my brother were in the house there in Whitehall. I'm 11 and he's 13. We were there 3 or 4 days. And just scrounging around anything we could eat. And there wasn't much food. And we didn't go to school. And our dad was gone, and nobody looked in on us, nothing. Our mom was gone, and this is kind of crazy. The 4th day he came home, we were so glad to see him, and of course worried about our mom. And she'd been in the hospital many times with a diabetic reaction, and she always came home, you know. And he just opened up the door, looked at us 2 boys, and he said, "She's dead."
You're kidding me.
And he just shut the door and went back out and was doing chores or puttering around the place. And we're just looking at each other, and I knew my life was going to change. It was going to get really bad. He was always abusive, and he didn't have to be drunk to be abusive.
Was he abusive to her?
No, oddly enough. Other than verbally abusive.
Yeah.
Never physically abusive, but he was always abusive to us. But I never thought I was going to die. But that day, I knew it was going to get worse. And within a few months, then he got to drinking really heavily, and it was sort of his, I think it was his way of committing suicide. And of course, it was his nature to be mean and cruel anyway to us. So then with the alcohol, then it amplified it. And then it was, every day was life-threatening, you know. It was a bad deal.
Did you find any relief, like for me, like going to school, at least I felt like I could let down a little bit, or was it so intense that it just overwhelmed you all the time?
I was just pretty quiet in school and pretty withdrawn. I just just kind of got through my days. You could never really block it out. And
Did you have horses?
I'll tell you an
at that
ironic
time?
story, though. Yeah, we did, because we were trick ropers. You know, we were rodeo
Right.
performers. Well, at that time, we had done a Kellogg's Sugar Pops commercial. We were the Sugar Pops kids, me and my brother.
How cool is that at
And,
10, 11 years old?
Yeah, it was really quite a neat deal. My mom was really proud of that, because she always sewed and made all our show outfits, you know.
Oh, cool.
She was really proud of that. Well, come to find out a few years later, while she was laying in the Ennis Hospital, now why in the hell he didn't take her to Bozeman or Butte?
Ennis, yeah.
Ennis, right? Her nurse told me years later, she said, I didn't know if I should ever tell you this, but she said, we had the TV going in your mom's room to help stimulate her back to consciousness, you know, and which is typical what they do with someone in a coma. And she said, you boys' TV commercial came on TV. And she said, as soon as the commercial was over, your mom died.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Maybe coincidence? I don't think so.
No.
But yeah, so that was, she was so proud of that. You know, she thought we were really going to make the big time with that. Well, sorry. But yeah, so it was just, you know, my story is not so different from everybody else. And that's why when I wrote the Faraway Horses, I met so many people, and I know you have through this, that there are a hell of a lot of people have had some really dark things happen to them that you'd never know unless you really got to know them. And you realize there's a lot of kindred spirits out there that life hasn't been too easy for them, but they find a way to cope in some way, and you'd never know it until you kind of got to know them. But I made friends with and met a lot of people that kind of said the same thing as you. Hey, man, I had no idea. Your life has always looked so perfect to me. You know, being the big horse guy and all that. I never knew the torment that you had to endure when you were younger. And it brought me closer to people that maybe would have never, ever gotten a chance to know me, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, too, going back and, like, coming out with kind of my story as well, when I did it, and to your point, my capacity for compassion for people is so much bigger
Yeah.
than it used to be, right? There's a different grace that you have for people because you recognize, like,
Yeah.
that person's probably, you can kind of start seeing it, right? Like, that person's doing their very best to keep it together.
Mm-hmm.
There's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there you can almost start sensing like somebody that's been through some trauma in their life. And anyway, for me, it's just my capacity for compassion for them through this process and journey of life and getting older is like, I just have a lot more of it because you don't know what people have
I
gone
think
through
a
in
person
their life.
matures emotionally. Well, they have the opportunity to mature emotionally. Some people
It's a
don't.
choice, right?
Yeah.
Was your dad proud of you? Did you ever feel proud, like when you did the commercials and when you guys were going to get out? I remember in the book you said that you were like the youngest RCA card holders at the time for your rodeo act. Like, did you ever get a sense of pride from him in that, or was he always critical of you?
He lived vicariously through us.
So
When
his
something-
identity was your
Yeah,
success.
he was proud of himself when things would go well for us, you know, in the entertainment thing. My dad, his hero was Monty Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at some stage he realized he was never going to be Monty Montana. But he had the ability to create this, to force it to happen in his sons. So that was the image that he wanted us to follow. And so that was as close to being Monty as what he was going to ever get.
Did you feel the pressure of that?
No, not really.
'Cause
But
you're in survival mode,
the
right?
pressure was, when we were little kids, the pressure was, go practice your trick roping or you're going to get whipped. So practice looked pretty damn good to us by comparison. So, and we got to be, you know, pretty competent
Yeah.
trick ropers. But It's funny, even years later, after my dad died, there's a very famous picture of Monty Montana on his horse Rex, where the horse is rearing and he's spinning a loop vertically on this pinto horse, paint horse, whatever. And been around for years. Iconic picture of Monty Montana. And there's even a copy of the picture in the Gallatin Gateway Inn after they, fixed it up and made it a beautiful old hotel again. Mary and I stayed there one time for her birthday, and we're walking up the stairs to our room, and I looked and gosh dang, there's Monty Montana, that picture. Well, what's really crazy is my dad got someone to paint a picture of him exactly the same pose, spinning a rope on
Wow.
a rearing pinto horse. And it was him, and he had this artist put a dog in the foreground, his dog. And it was just kind of creepy,
Yeah.
And I saw it in his house years later, not too long before he died, and I was like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah. Something going on there for sure.
Yeah. But, gosh, I think some of the things with him, we always had this, a Labrador dog around, and gosh, when that dog would come in the house, he'd want it to lay down in a certain place, and I've seen him many, many times take a hot shot and just torture this dog until it would just come in and just race over and lay down and just kind of hide. And I'd think, and that was before my mom died, but I thought he'd do that to me if he needed to, felt like he needed to.
Yeah.
Come to find out, I was right. But,
He did.
oh yeah,
Hot shot.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. He'd beat you up like a man. It's not like it was a little bit of a whooping. Like those small skillets, like for just cooking a couple of eggs. Oh, he worked me over one time with one of those, just until my head was just in the corner of the room, and he had the heel of his boot on my neck, and I just kind of cranked around in the corner, and he finally figured I had enough, I guess. But yeah, it's just, I could tell you stories it'd blow your mind.
But no rhyme. There was no trigger warnings. Like it wasn't like if you
I think
were
he
home
really-
late or didn't practice enough roping. Like it was just a constant.
Well, one time, and this was after my mom died, because things, when it comes to domestic problems, and I know you would agree, they always escalate. They always go to the next level. They don't stay the same. And there was a time we lived in Ennis that he decided that me and my brother were probably using too much toilet paper. And he kind of yelled at us, and then I thought, oh, God, here it comes. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, he was famous for that. He'd get good and drunk, and then he'd yank us out of bed, and we'd have to sit at the table, and he'd scream at us. And then he'd beat on us for a while, and then he'd make us sit down. And of course, you're freezing to death. You're in your little tidy whities in the middle of the night. And we're just begging him to go to bed because we had to go to school the next day. And he was on us, intermittently beating and yelling at us for 4 days on that one.
Man.
Over toilet paper,
Yeah, that's a level of
That's-
brokenness that most people.
So I have very little tolerance at my age for someone who's petty,
Yeah.
Well,
these things shape us, right? Like.
it's like, I know what's important.
Yeah.
I know what big problems are. And when someone's being petty, I call them out. And
Yeah,
I go,
good for
you
you.
ought to be ashamed of yourself
Yeah.
to be that petty, because there are some people who have quite a burden to bear, and that's not it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's truth for sure. And it got to the point where what was a coach or something saw some of the ramifications of the whoopings
Yeah.
that you were enduring, and that's kind of where your life started to change a little bit, right?
Yeah, Coach Cleverly, he was a very famous football coach from Ennis, kind of a Bobby Knight type guy. And I never even felt all that close to the guy at the time. I was just another kid in school. And he contacted Johnny France, who was a deputy sheriff at the time, when he started to see, the evidence of us being beat up. And in those days, law enforcement did not enter into domestic problems. You let the family work that out. And then it happened again, pretty bad. And Johnny took a chance, cleverly got a hold of him. Johnny took a chance at losing his job. And he told the sheriff, he said, I don't care what happens, I got to get those kids out of there. And then, but what was kind of crazy is my dad had, after my mom died, he'd put an ad in Western Horseman for a housekeeper. Well, it was my dad. Western Horseman was being used as my dad's version of Tinder, So this lady moves out from Indiana named Norma. Well, he had no intention of her being a housekeeper. Well, she moved right in, and pretty soon he was pretty charming, for a couple of months. We were actually relatively safe because he was on good behavior.
Yeah, because he needed something.
And she had a son the same age as me. And I thought, well, gosh, I guess I like her pretty good if she's going to take the heat off us.
Safety, yeah.
Well, then, those things only last so long. Then it kind of fell apart. So about the time she was terrified because she saw what he was really like. So that was about the time that Johnny France said, you're not going to go home. You're going to go with me. And then she left and took her son. And she told us, she said, don't worry, I'll raise you boys. I'll take care of you boys. And because oddly enough, when you're in that environment, you don't want to leave as a little kid because you don't know where to go. It's all you know. Even if it might be a horribly terrifying environment, you don't think you have anywhere to go.
It's the same reason why women stay in abusive relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like the devil out there might be worse than the devil I'm in right now, right? The hell I'm in right now.
So we're with her for a couple of weeks, and she was just living in a little apartment in Ennis.
And where was your dad? Was he trying to track you down?
He was back at the ranch, but he was kind of stalking us, and she didn't have any money, didn't have a way to make a living. But we left because she assured us that we'd had someone to care for us. Well, a couple of weeks later, she said, get in the truck, we're going to take a ride. And we go to Virginia City, which is a county seat. And she said, you guys can get out. And there we are, sitting on the front steps of the courthouse. And she drove away. She said, I'm so sorry, I can't raise you boys. I'm a single mother. I can't even hardly raise my own boy. She said, they'll take care of you here. So we were sitting on the front steps of the courthouse looking at each other like, oh, this is freaking great. What in the hell are we going to do now? Well, then a few minutes later, out come a man named Emery Smith, who was the social worker for Madison County. And just a neat old man, and between him and Johnny, we ended up at Forest and Betsy's. We lived with Johnny for a couple of weeks in the interim, and he just took us in his house.
And you didn't see your dad for this time since the lady took you guys? And
Right. No, we didn't see him. Didn't want to because he'd have shot us.
Yeah. The gig was up.
And like say the escalation of domestic violence is a true thing. And it was at the point to where within a very short time, I can guarantee you there would have been a homicide.
Especially after she left, right? Because then the rage...
He'd have blamed that on us.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So it would have either been my brother killing him or him killing...
Because he's 14 at this time.
Yeah, and Smokey wasn't so soft-hearted as me. So he would have probably tried to defend himself and me, and somebody would have died.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the escalation of that woman leaving him and the pride, the hit that his pride took and all of that, and her taking you guys like...
Yeah. So after we went to live with our foster parents, we were only going to be there for the summer.
Till they
And-
found a placement for you.
Yeah. And we were maybe going to go live with a sort of adopted aunt and uncle. They weren't really an aunt and uncle, but friends of the family. You know how everybody's got someone like that. We didn't really want to go there because they lived in the city, and I mean, we were country kids.
Yeah.
We had horses and we rode. And so after spending the summer there, we asked them if we could stay. And of course, Betsy said, well, of course you can, son. And, but for 3 or 4 years, my dad would send us birthday cards in the mail. Now, you couldn't do that these days, but in the birthday card, he'd say, I'm just waiting till you turn 18, then I'm going to kill you. And he'd say, I was watching you from the ridge through my rifle scope, and
What?
he'd say all the things that we were doing to do our chores. So he was, it wasn't made up. He was
So where'd the Shirleys live? Where was their ranch? Was it near Ennis?
Norris.
Oh, and okay, so it wasn't that far. So this is
No,
all
very close. Yeah.
Yeah, this is happening.
Yeah. So,
So
he was,
even
he
with
was,
that distance,
yeah, he
it's
was
torment.
climbing up on the ridge and looking at us through the scope of his rifle. And then finally, this persisted, and then my foster dad, Forrest, he took those cards to Johnny. Well, by that time, Johnny's a sheriff. And Johnny went to my dad. And, you know, like I say, there's a lot more policing for that kind of thing nowadays, but it was kind of the Wild West. And Johnny went to my dad, and he said, you have till tomorrow to be out of the state. And he doesn't ever admit to it because, you know, it would be a little unprofessional, but Johnny beat the hell out of my dad.
He did.
Yeah. And because Johnny had been a Golden Gloves boxer, so he gave my dad a thumping, and he said, I'm going to show you what those boys had to go through. And the next day he was gone.
And you and did you immediately feel peace?
I felt safe with
Safe.
Forrest and Betsy. You know, it was, you know, most little kids don't want to go to bed, you know. I couldn't wait to go to bed because I got to experience knowing that I was going to be able to sleep through the whole night.
Without getting jerked out of bed.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was the first safe place I'd ever known.
And they really became, I mean, more than foster parents.
Oh
to you.
yeah. Oh yeah. They had 4 kids of their own, and they weren't wealthy people. It was just a little tiny ranch, just big enough to starve to death on. So, you know, all the foster kids were also free labor. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, for sure.
But they raised 17 other boys besides their own kids.
Wow.
I was the last one. Ironically, Johnny France, the sheriff, was their first.
You cannot make that up.
Yeah, his parents died, and he was with his uncle, Joe France, down on the Lower Madison, a couple of miles away in a little old homestead. And he didn't even want the kids, but it was, you know, he was the only family that Johnny had. So he was kind of doing the same damn stuff to Johnny as what my dad did. Well, Forrest and Betsy, they decided they were going to take him. There was no foster care or anything like that in those
before
days.
all that.
And Forrest, he was a big man. And he went down, knocked on the door, and he said, Joe, this is how it is. I'm going to take that boy and raise him, me and Betsy. And I'm either going to beat you to death and then take the boy, or you just let the boy go. You choose. Well,
Wow.
Joe let him take the boy. He said, good riddance. I didn't want him anyway.
Wow.
And so Johnny was the first before they ever had any children of their own. And then, ironically, I was the last.
What an impact those two had for saying yes to the possibility of, in their heart,
Yeah.
having the capacity to say, this can't happen any longer. We're gonna
Yeah.
and look at the wake of that. Look how he repaid
Yeah,
that process in your life.
yeah,
And then obviously what you've been able to do,
Yeah.
all because of their yes to.
Well-
They had compassion for seeing what was going on, and
to not look the other way.
Yeah, which again back then, like you referred a couple times, like this doesn't happen nowadays, but back then it was kind of like you mind your own business.
Yeah.
Right. Sweep it under the rug. Like they'll work it out. It's family.
Yep.
We don't talk about those things. So they're revolutionary in
It's funny, you know, the pendulum, how it swings in terms of society. Because nowadays, you know, sometimes you hear about it going the other way too far, to where some poor mother has a screaming brat at the grocery store, and because she won't buy him an armload of candy, she might lead him by the arm out there and stick him in the car, and someone reports her for abuse because she said no to her child that was, you know, being a little knothead. You know, sometimes you hear about it going the other way, and it's like, gosh, that poor woman's just trying to get by. And anybody that's raised kids knows that sometimes they're just going to have a meltdown, and it's just, you're like, how in the hell do I deal with this?
especially single mothers that
Yeah.
that don't have the reinforcement of a dad in the home. I mean,
Exactly.
if just statistically, if you look at prison populations, it's overwhelming how many of them didn't have a dad in the home.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, even through all, it's probably shocked some people, but even through all the abuse and things that I've been through, once in a while I'll see somebody's just kid that's just a little monster, and I'll think,
You need to butt whoop them.
you need to whip that kid. You need to take your belt off or something.
Yeah.
You know, you need to turn things around because he's going to end up in jail. And you'd think I'd be so anti anything
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Well, I'm not. There has to be some sort of a deterrent, and you're right. There's a lot of kids would have made it all right if they'd have had a dad.
Yeah.
It's just a lot for a single mother to have to deal with, you know.
You know, Grant Gallagher, who you
Yeah,
know and I work
sure.
for and has been a mentor of mine, and he told me something one time. He said this applies to horses, dogs, and children. He said, discipline without love is abuse, and love without discipline is abuse.
Yeah, that's
And
sure
that really
right.
stuck with
Yep.
me to what your point is like,
Yeah, I
man, to
agree.
really love someone they need discipline, because if we're left up to our own devices, right, we're not smart enough to make good decisions when we're little. Like it's ice cream before dinner, never brush your teeth, right? Like
Right, a kid's not real good at raising himself.
no boundaries
Any more
and-
than a young horse isn't real good at ending up a good horse
Yeah.
without some sort of boundaries, you know.
when I read the story again, because the book's 20 years old, is it?
Yeah, probably.
Around there. I had such a spot, like I got emotional reading about Betsy, because I had a grandma who was my Betsy,
Yeah.
who was my safe place.
Yeah.
That's the place that I could find refuge and feel safe, and try to talk my dad into letting me spend the night at their house when things were horrible,
I think
at home. And
I think God gives people like that to you if you just let that happen. And my answer to a Betsy or your grandma is one of the greatest titles of a book I've ever heard of, and it's really self-explanatory. And the title is "When God Winks." That's
that's it.
Yeah, and you just think, I'm sure at some point in my life, God probably thought, well, it's probably about time we throw the little bastard a bone, you know?
He could use a little nudge the right
Yeah.
way right here.
Yeah. But then you have to make the right choices. You can't attribute everything good or bad to God being there or God not being there. You have choices to make. And
There's
then,
free will.
And no matter what you've been through as a kid, and I'm a stickler about this, there is a point to where you have to make your own choices, and I don't give a damn what you've been through. You still have to make the right choices if it's going to work out. And there's a point to where it doesn't work for me, for anybody, to blame it on their past, their family, their aunt, their uncle, their grandma, their mother, father. There's a point where it's like, okay, that train left the station. You don't get to do that anymore.
Because you stay in victimhood, and we see it everywhere all around us, right?
Yep.
Anybody goes through a little bit of trauma or major trauma too. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize somebody else's trauma. And
No.
I also tell people all the time, like your story, my story, it's relative. Like somebody else that had a dad that grew up in the house but never paid any attention to him, I think psychologically they're sometimes worse off than
Yeah.
maybe I was, you know?
Yeah.
And so I get the relativity of it, and
Yeah.
I don't want to minimize it, but
It
but you
doesn't make it
see
any less.
so many
Emotional abuse
is worse. You heal up
in a lot
from
of
the
ways can be more damaging than the physical abuse.
yeah, because you heal up from the physical abuse. The scratches and the bruises go away.
Yeah.
It's what's left inside that is,
Yep.
like you're saying, so damaging.
Yep.
But you're so right on about that fork in the road of like, okay, yes, this has happened. This did happen. I'm going to choose to be a victim, or I'm going to choose to be powerful and make powerful decisions moving forward to better my life and situation. And I think my grandma and your Betsy probably were out their knees praying for us
Oh, yeah.
to have some guidance in that area because, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to make bad decisions.
Yeah. I think, there are some things in a person's makeup that helps you along the way if you've been through that. I've always been really, really soft-hearted, empathetic. It's my nature. I hate confrontation. To a fault, because there are times when I probably should have been able to step up a little bit more, but I'm just not that guy. I just want peace. So, in that, I think that's probably why the horse has been such a great refuge for me, because they wanted the same thing as me. They didn't want trouble. They don't want trouble. They just want peace. But they want to please you. God made them to where for some strange reason, they want to please you. But most of all, they want peace. So I could relate to that. It's like, okay, now here's something that kind of makes sense. But so it's like I told you yesterday, the horse has done so much for me that I don't know what my journey would have been like without it. Maybe it would have worked out anyway in some other way, but I doubt it.
Yeah, being around guys who thumped on horses and stuff, that hurt me in a way that I thought, man, there's got to be a better way because, going on these ranches. And again, I'm not throwing shame on anybody. Everybody's
Sure.
It's kind of the same thing to our point of like what was modeled by our dads.
Everybody's doing the best they can with what they have to work with.
Exactly. And yeah, seeing some of the things that I saw growing up with horses, I was like, and fortunately for me, my dad and my uncle, who grew up around and raised and taught the beginning stages of horsemanship, they were also very soft-hearted.
Yeah.
And weren't like that. But, you work on the big ranches, and that kind of is some of the things that happen.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, my uncle worked at the Snake River Ranch in Jackson Hole, which he got to meet Ray Hunt. And so my early stages of starting colts were my Uncle Ricky had worked there for several years and been to a bunch of race clinics, and because the ranch would hire him, which is so smart, right, for them to do something like
probably met your uncle.
I'm sure you did.
Ago.
I was thinking about that last night. I'm sure you ran into him.
I'm sure I did, yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got introduced to that style of kind of thinking and turning a horse loose. But back to your story, it wasn't too long after high school, right, that when you met Ray.
Yeah, right. Basically, out of high school, I left my foster parents' place and went out in the world. It was difficult because I was 16 most of my senior year of high school. I had just turned 17 when I graduated, so I needed to go out and make a living, but I wasn't really a man yet, But so I got a job with some local guys, and they had a lot of hay ground, and they ran about 500 cows, but it was, they were farmers, So all I did that summer was irrigate and put up hay and all the stuff that
Cowboys don't like doing.
Cowboys don't like to do. But it was a job, but I did distinguish myself. I'm the only person that I know of that ever in Madison County that ever rolled a swather. So
they're pretty wide to roll a swather. That took a little doing.
Yeah, it can be done. So that brought my farming career to an end.
To a screaming halt.
Abruptly, and then that's when I got a cowboying job. at what was called Madison River Cattle Company in those days, and they didn't really have a spot for anybody. But I've been talking to the cow boss all summer long, just begging for a cowboy job, and so I told him, I said, well, I'm no longer employed as of today. And for some reason, I had a premonition that morning. My friend Monty, who I played high school basketball with, he's working there too. I rolled my bedroll that morning. And we lived in this old nasty trailer house and no windows in it. He said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. I just felt like I should roll my bed. Well, then after I had the swather incident, it dawned on me that, God probably just said, you might as well roll your crap up.
It's over.
Yes, it's a little line here. So I went there to that place, and they had a pen full of horses that were all going to just be canners. They'd either buck people off, run away with them, flipped over on them. There's about a dozen of them. And the cow boss said, look, he said, the manager doesn't even know I hired you yet, and I'm probably going to get in trouble. But he said, if you can take those horses and be a cowboy on those horses, because we're just going to chicken feed them anyway, he said, I know he'll hire you. And I said, all right, that's all I need. Well, I didn't know anything about Ray Hunt in those days. I'd heard of him, that's it. But I was tough, and kind of grew up doing some of the same things you were around as a kid. And I was a pretty competent bronc rider, which is a damn good thing because I sure didn't get along with him. But I got her done, and I was a good roper, of course, because of my trick roping background. And I got it done, and then that ranch started sending me to raise clinics. They saw that there might be a little hope for me to maybe learn something. And they raised horses and had a big gelding and bull sale every year.
Oh, okay.
And so it was, things really started for me then. I was maybe there 8 or 9 months, and here I'm still 17, almost 18, and the manager put me in charge of the entire horse operation.
Wow, you really made an impression on him.
And it was tough because now there's guys 2 times my age that are kind of working for me. I'm the boss. Well, of course, it wasn't too long. He was sending me to the Ray Hunt clinics, and I was eating it up, man, and I was getting better by the day. And then some of the guys on the ranch at the time, they called me the golden boy, because it's pretty tough on a guy in his 40s taking orders from a teenager.
Very.
Well, I was better than them, and I worked harder. And horses that they wouldn't get on, I'd get on. Mm-hmm. So I earned it. But it was tough on me. It's like, gosh dang,
well, you want the approval of your peers and the guys ahead of you, right?
I don't have any friends on the ranch.
Yeah.
It's nice that I'm working my way up the food chain, but damn. But after I'd been there a while, that kind of, it settled down, and I was accepted. But I liked where I was going, and I just stayed with it and really hooked on to Ray's deal. And there are lots of good hands that have been around Ray Hunt over the years, and they're out there, and you know of some of them. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you this. There isn't any of them that were any more devoted to Ray Hunt and what he was trying to do than me.
And he knew that too.
He did, but he never said much. He would never say things to you, real, that were like sensitive.
Yeah.
And I think he just reserved his opinion of you because so many people would come and go. They'd think they discovered sliced bread when they met Ray Hunt, and then the next thing you know, they're doing something else, off track. But not too long before he died, I was there seeing him and Carolyn in Texas on my way through to do a clinic, and I'm just getting ready to go to bed, and Ray, he's still up, and I'm walking out, he said, hey, I got to tell you something. And he said, and I stopped and I thought, oh, shit, what did I do? He said, just so you know, I know this, you were always there. You never wavered. You were always there. And he looked at me and he said, thanks.
Wow.
And I go to my bedroom and I thought, don't tell me I'm not patient. I just waited 35 years to hear that. But
Wow.
he knew all along, and yet he never helped me with my clinics. He never promoted me or would tell someone, "Hey, I can't do a clinic, but you get Buck." He never did that. Nope. He said,
wasn't his
"You're going to make
style.
it. You make it on your own. If you got any talent, if you got anything to offer, they'll figure it out. But I'm not going to do it for you."
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I'd struggle a little bit, and I'd think, "Gosh, dang, you could throw me a bone,
Right.
here,
It'd be
Ray."
nice to.
But I'm glad he didn't. He knew he did the right thing. But there were some times where I was like, "Gosh, dang,
Starving out here.
I'm getting a little thin."
That's pretty cool. I was honored enough to get to ride with him a little bit, and I think if not one of his last clinics he did at the barn I was managing in Driggs, and then from there he went home to Mountain Home and then on to Texas, and
Yeah.
gotten to become very good friends with Jayden, his grandson, and
Jaden's been my buddy for 40 some years.
yeah, he's
I mean,
awesome.
not Jaden, but Jaden's dad,
Yeah.
Preston, and I've been buddies, and then of course Jaden and I are good
Yeah,
friends.
you guys have been around the world a little bit together.
We've done a lot.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of Jaden. He's good kid. He's not really a kid, but anybody younger than me is a kid.
Yeah, right.
But I love him. He's a good feller.
It was funny at that clinic. There was a gal that's not been able to get on her horse. It would stand still. So I wasn't in the clinic. I was just hosting or whatever. He's like, "Can you go get on that paint horse?" So, I wander out there because this thing wasn't rank or anything
Yeah.
like that. I just wouldn't stand still for get on. So I go get on it, and I didn't adjust the stirrups or anything. And he had everybody kind of trotting around, and he asked everybody to go and elope to the left, and that pig bucked me off on my head. Oh, I was so embarrassed. After I've ridden with him 5 or 6 times or whatever.
Yeah.
And that old paint horse got me down.
Well, we probably should wrap this up pretty quick, but I
Yeah.
got to tell you a funny story. Townsend Prince, he's a good friend of ours, and he hangs around and starts colts with us, and kind of that generation of young guys, Noah and Isaac and all those guys.
Yep.
And he was a really good PRCA bronc rider, and he rode with the Etbauer boys, and
Oh, really? Yeah, handy.
big time, top level. And he's gotten really interested in working these horses now. Like a lot of the rodeo crowd, it's usually the bronc riders that gravitate toward the horsemanship, oddly enough, rather than the timed event people. And I don't know why that is, but it is. Well, anyway, I was going to do a clinic in Fort Collins, and I knew he was going to ride there, and he was bringing some cattle for us to have a little roping deal. I said, and he is quite a character, I said, how you doing, Townsend? He said, I'm a broken man. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, now, I was a pretty good bronc rider. I said, oh, yeah, you had quite a reputation. He said, yeah, I was out gathering those cows this morning, and my mom's horse got a little bit fussy. So I told her to step off, and I'd go ahead and finish gathering cows. He said, this 18-year-old Tennessee Walker mare. And he said, I got about 10 feet, and that thing bucked me off on my head in the rock pile. He said, I'm pretty sure it was like an NFR eliminator. It's like, 18-year-old Tennessee Walker? I'm thinking, no.
Yeah.
But he said, I got up, he said, and I was broken, emotionally broken. And he said, and then my mom went over and caught the mare, got on and loped off. But that'll happen.
Aren't they the most humbling animals? I mean, you think
Yeah.
you're getting somewhere, and then, yeah, for sure. And so your book was 20 years ago, and then you did the documentary
Yeah.
probably about 10 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
What's changed for you since then? Since the documentary 10 years ago, where do you see this thing going, and what's been your biggest takeaway?
Nothing's really changed in that, when I did the book and did the documentary, sometimes you'll get interviewers that are kind of lazy, they'll ask kind of cliched, predictable questions. And of course, a lot of people would say, for either one, the book or the documentary, they'd say, well, I bet this was a great healing experience for you and gave you closure and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, no, not really. I wrote the book because I already had closure,
Yeah.
if you want to call it that. I was already healed up. And things were going just fine for me, I wanted to encourage someone who maybe didn't believe that things could work out, that didn't believe in happy endings anymore. So, and that's what it was for me. I guess if I had a wish list, I'm still committed to the Faraway Horses becoming a feature film, because I think it would be a really good story on a very large scale for people to see the story.
Is there any talk of it?
A bit here and there, but it's hard to get a movie done. It takes a lot of money to get a movie done. But I think the story has enough quality to it that somebody somewhere will read the book that is capable of helping me to make that happen. And someday, I haven't given up. It's not over. But in the meantime, I have a good life, and I'm surrounded by people that love me and appreciate me, and that I appreciate them. So I don't want to change a thing. I just want it to last a little longer. That's about it.
Well, your perspective, I remember I was at a roping with you one time when the Horse Whisperer had just come out, and somebody was saying something along those lines of, wow, this is going to change your life. And I'll never forget, you looked over at that person, you stopped roping, you said, when this movie is in the $5 bin at Walmart, I'll still be doing the same thing that I've always been doing. Like,
Yeah.
I think your perspective on things is really, really cool, and it's certainly helped motivate me in certain ways. And have that perspective of like, people have this one thing, they get to this one mountain and they just kind of stop. And I'm like, and you're always keeping going. You're always like, okay, that was a cool experience. What's next?
Stay hungry.
Yeah. And kind of again, wrapping up, what would you say to the guy that's maybe been through some stuff in their life and they're maybe leaving home for the first time and wrestling with hearing your story and like, dang, I want to seek getting out of maybe some of the predicaments I've been in, and what would you give advice to somebody that's shared some of your early life experiences?
Do what you say you're going to do, and never lie.
Fair enough. Well, Buck, again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and, again, what you've done for me from a distance, but also in person. I do get to run into you at ropings, and I've got to get beaten by you, and I've also got to win some ropings with you, which was always an honor. And how can I would encourage anyone to go to the Pro-Am, the roping that you and Rieta put on and your team. It's the highlight of a lot of working cowboys year to get to go to that. And this year it was moved to Northern California, and literally it was like the funnest thing that I've done in a very long time. It was such a great time. And thank you for your generosity in that. Like I see you buying all the teams and giving all the money back, and you're an extremely generous guy, and I just wanted to say thank you for all you've done for our community.
I know that just to I want to add this, that there are a lot of people that struggle, in their life, and they make bad decisions and good decisions. I wouldn't want anybody to think that I'm this pinnacle of excellence, that I've never made any mistakes, never done anything regrettable. I sure as hell have, like anybody else. I'm the same as anybody else. I'm just trying to make new mistakes. I'm trying not to make the same old ones over and over again. So, everybody's going to fall short. Ray used to say there's only one guy that was perfect. And he said, but there ain't anything wrong with trying to be perfect in what you do, but you're always going to fall short, but it sure doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah, that's good.
BuckBrannaman.com,
is that your website?
Brannaman.com, I think, yeah.
And then, real quick, what's the channel the media that you're working on? People
the
can
COVID
check you
thing
out?
got me started thinking about that, and just, not knowing whether this whole clinic thing's going to come to an end, that I couldn't do public things anymore. And then I got to thinking about how I wish so much that there was something on film left of Ray that I could enjoy and draw from, and there really isn't. There wasn't that kind of technology in those days.
that one video where he rides the colt that blows up. And
Yeah.
wore that thing out too.
Yeah. So I'm doing this deal called the Buck Channel, and eventually it will be hundreds and hundreds of little vignettes, 5-10 minutes of everything I can think of to help somebody with their horses, from real beginning level stuff to advanced things. And I'm just accumulating them, and it's going to launch within the next probably 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
And already got about 150 videos now on it, and then I'll just be doing it right along. I'll be doing something and write a note, and I'll just think, I got to talk about that. I got to do 5-10 minutes on that.
That's great.
So the
will that be on your
topic's endless.
website?
It will.
Access to that?
And once it launches, then a person will be able to just get on their phone and just Google the Buck Channel, and you're there.
Awesome.
So, yeah, it should be fun. I hope it works. I put in quite a bit of effort to doing it, but if it doesn't, I still have a nice day job, and
Yeah.
I don't mind what I'm doing anyway. So.
Yep. Well, go check Buck out on that and look at his clinic schedule. And I would encourage anybody that is into horses or even not to go audit the clinic if not riding it. And again, Buck, thank you so much for your generosity and your time and
pleasure.
all you've done for our cowboy community. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you.
You bet.